Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the case that changed his mind. If you've ever wondered what unease smells like, try a Tuesday morning at the Brownstone when everything's running too perfectly. Fritz's eggs were a masterpiece. The coffee had moral character, and even Wolfe's orchids had that smug, well-bathed look that makes you want to swat them with the morning paper. That's when the bell rang. Once, sharp and sure, without the polite tap that separates visitors from intruders. I was halfway through my second cup when Wolfe looked up from the Gazette. "Archie," he said, "someone is at the door." "You don't say," I told him. "Maybe it's the milkman, come to apologize for civilization." He flicked his eyes toward me, the look that means move. I set down my cup, straightened my tie, and went to the front. The woman waiting outside didn't belong to West 35th Street before noon. She was tall, precise, and wrapped in grey cashmere with a matching hat that probably cost more than my last 3 suits. Under her calm veneer, her hands trembled like typewriter keys waiting for a story. "Miss or Mrs.?" I asked. "Miss Broom, Evelyn Broom." Her voice had polish, the kind that comes from too many Manhattan cocktail parties and not enough breakfasts. "Mr. Wolfe will see me. It's urgent." "That word gets you in the door," I said. "After that, you're on your own." Inside, she paused in the hall as if taking communion. The office looked the same as always. Wolfe behind the mahogany fortress, yellow silk robe gleaming, the air thick with orchid humidity and common sense. He didn't rise. He never does. He merely inclined his head a fraction. "Good morning, madam. State your business succinctly." She took a breath that was halfway between a sob and a sales pitch. "It's Julian Merrow, my client, my friend. He's disappeared." Wolfe frowned, which in our house counts as an earthquake. "Disappeared? Voluntarily or otherwise?" "I don't know. He was finishing his new book, his best work, he said. But now he's gone and—" She fumbled in her handbag and drew out a folded letter. "He left this with his doorman, addressed to me. No explanation. Just silence." Wolfe gestured toward the red chair. "Sit, Miss Broom. Panic on your feet serves no purpose." She sat, clutching her gloves. I took the letter, glanced over it. 3 lines in neat masculine script. "Evelyn, forgive me. Destroy the manuscript." That was it. No signature, just initials. J.M. Julian Merrow, I said. "The novelist who wrote The Palace Without Windows." I remember the review called it a masterpiece of moral confusion. She gave me a quick look, half grateful, half annoyed. "He was a genius, Mr. Goodwin. Troubled, yes, but not suicidal. Someone wanted that manuscript." Wolfe folded his hands on his stomach. What possible value could a manuscript possess beyond its printing price? $50,000, she said. That got him. He opened his eyes wider by at least a millimeter. "Advance?" "Yes. Sterling and Bond paid it. But the book isn't finished. Or wasn't, until a week ago. He said it would change everything. He said it would—" She stopped, biting her lip. "He said it might get him killed." I leaned back. A writer predicting his own reviews. That's rare foresight. Her hands clenched tighter. "I'm not joking, Mr. Goodwin. Someone's been following me since Julian vanished. I need Mr. Wolfe's help." Wolfe sighed. "My help, madam, is neither free nor whimsical. You have not described a crime." "It is a crime. He's missing. His apartment's ransacked and his notes are gone." She hesitated, then added, "And this morning I found this." She pulled from her bag a gold fountain pen, heavy and ornate. The initials J.M. gleamed on the barrel. "I swear I don't know how it got there," she said. "It was lying among my gloves. I hadn't seen it since the night he disappeared." Wolfe extended a hand but didn't touch the pen. "Archie." I fetched an envelope, dropped the pen inside. "Nice piece of jewellery for a writer," I said. "Maybe he planned to sign checks with inspiration." Her eyes flashed. "You think I killed him?" "Lady, I don't even know if he's dead. Around here we start with missing and work our way up. She looked from me to Wolfe. Please, I can pay whatever you require. Wolfe's eyelids sank like theatre curtains. Money is a vulgar incentive, Miss Broom, yet I find it stimulating in moderation. What precisely do you expect me to do? Find him, or find what happened to him. The police won't listen. They think it's a publicity stunt. I said, maybe it is. Authors love publicity, especially the kind that doesn't require typing. That earned me a glare from Wolfe. Archie, control your tongue. Miss Broom, have you enemies? Rivals? She hesitated. In publishing, everyone is a rival, but no one who'd harm Julian. Then what? Wolfe murmured. Did he mean by destroy the manuscript? She looked down. I thought he was exaggerating. He said the book exposed people. Real people. He wouldn't tell me who. Indeed. Wolfe tapped the bell cord once. Fritz appeared silently at the door, immaculate as always. Coffee, Fritz, for 3. Ja, Herr Wolfe. The pause that followed was thick enough to cut. When Fritz left, Wolfe fixed her with his calm, crushing gaze. I despise melodrama. Nevertheless, you may have stumbled upon something genuine. I must read the manuscript. It's gone, she whispered. All copies, even the carbons. Archie Goodwin, professional optimist, said, Then we'll have to start with the next best thing. Who stood to lose if the book saw daylight? She looked up. You believe me? I believe you, I said. Wolfe made a small noise, half snort, half approval. Mr. Goodwin's phrasing, while inelegant, suffices. You may leave the pen with us. Return at 6 this evening. Perhaps by then I shall decide whether to tolerate this enterprise. She rose slowly. You'll take the case? I have not said so. Her lips tightened. I can offer a retainer. $500 now. She drew a checkbook, her hand shaking. Wolfe held out a palm, forestalling her. Do not insult me with haste. Archie will examine Mr. Merrow's apartment and report. Then I shall pronounce judgment. When she'd gone, leaving perfume and tension behind, I turned to Wolfe. You do realize, if she's on the level, we're up against New York publishing. That's almost as bad as the IRS. He was already leaning back, eyes closed. Phooey, ink and vanity. Sure, but ink and vanity pay $50,000 a book. Even orchids don't fetch that. He opened one eye. Archie, have you ever read a modern novel? Only the ones with pictures. He groaned softly. Ignorance is sometimes a shield. Fetch me the Gazette, and since you're aflame with curiosity, telephone Mr. Saul Panzer. Ask him to observe Miss Broom, discreetly. Suspicious already? Caution, not suspicion. The woman trembles too artfully, and she lied about the pen. I perched on the edge of the desk. Maybe she panicked. Then she should have rehearsed. He shut his eyes again. Return the pen to the safe. We shall keep it as a token of impending annoyance. I tucked the envelope away. You're not really going to turn this one down, are you? He didn't answer, which meant, of course, that he wouldn't. At 1 o'clock, Fritz announced lunch, oyster stew and hot rolls. Wolfe rose with a sigh worthy of Hamlet. Halfway to the dining room, he said, Mr. Goodwin? Yes, sir. Your levity is an affliction. Thanks. I try to keep it chronic. He paused, turning his head just enough. Be careful with Miss Broom. I suspect she plays at helplessness as others play the piano, competently and for applause. That was Wolfe's way of saying, don't get charmed. He was right, of course, but there are worse hazards than charm in New York. After lunch I made calls, Merrow's publisher, his apartment manager, even a cab company he'd used. Everyone had a version of the truth, none of them compatible. By 3 I had a notebook full of contradictions and one growing itch. The missing manuscript wasn't just paper, it was bait. At 5 minutes to 6, Wolfe came down from the plant rooms, the smell of orchids clinging to him like self-respect. I briefed him, quick and clean. He listened, expressionless. When the bell rang again, 2 short rings this time, I went to answer. Evelyn Broom stood there, pale but composed. She stepped inside without invitation. Mr. Wolfe, she said, I've had another call, a man's voice. He said if I go to the police, I'll join Julian. Describe the voice, Wolfe said. Low, educated, no accent. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, note that. I nodded, writing. Anything else? Yes, he said the book's title, The Case That Changed His Mind. That's Julian's new novel. That got a flicker from Wolfe. A curious coincidence. Miss Broom, I accept your retainer, but understand, if you have lied to me, I shall withdraw and denounce you with equal vigour. She nodded, relief flooding her face. Thank you. Wolfe reached for his beer glass, condensation shining in the lamplight. I despise the printed word, he murmured, but I abhor chaos more. Archie, tomorrow you will visit Sterling and Bond. Publishing Row, eh? I'll take my thesaurus. He ignored that. Fritz, our visitor will require a taxi. Fritz appeared instantly, proving again that the man moves faster for guests than for me. When she'd gone, I said, Well, boss, you've done it again. Rescued literature. He gave me a side glance. You may, if you wish, ghostwrite my memoirs. Title them The Idiot at My Elbow. Confound it, he added when I grinned. That was closure enough for the day. He turned toward the elevator for his evening orchid session, and I went to my desk to type up the first line of the case file. Client, Evelyn Broom, literary agent. Trouble, one vanished writer, one missing manuscript, and a gold pen that doesn't know where it's been. If I'd known then what that pen would buy us, headaches, headlines, and one full-scale conversion of Nero Wolfe's opinions, I might have melted it down for scrap. By 10:30 the next morning, I was wading through the kind of air you could slice and serve on toast, Manhattan in a heat wave. Wolfe had dispatched me to Sterling and Bond publishers with a grunt that sounded suspiciously like "phooey," which is how he says good luck when he doesn't mean it. Sterling and Bond occupied a polished mausoleum on Madison Avenue. The lobby smelled of printer's ink and desperation. A receptionist with eyebrows like editorial commas looked me over and decided I wasn't selling encyclopedias. Mr. Bond is expecting you, Mr. Goodwin, she said, which meant Miss Broom had phoned ahead. The elevator opened onto a corridor lined with framed dust jackets, each one screaming success in 12-point type. The firm's hum hit me, typewriters clacking like nervous teeth, phones jangling, people walking briskly for no reason. I was in the jungle of literature, where every predator wears pince-nez. Alan Bond's office looked like the inside of a platinum pocket watch, bright, precise, and expensive. He was the kind of man whose handshake made you check your rings afterward, thin, polished, and about as warm as a bookkeeper's soul. Mr. Goodwin, he said, Miss Broom told me you'd call regarding Mr. Merrow. A regrettable situation. That's one word, I said, taking the chair he didn't offer. He's disappeared, and you're not curious? He smiled faintly. Curiosity is a vice in publishing. We wait for copy, not corpses. That got us off on the right foot. Julian Merrow was under contract, he went on. He owed us a book. If he's vanished, it's between him and his conscience. Miss Broom tends toward dramatics. She thrives on crises, keeps her young. The way he said it, young meant improper. I jotted notes while he admired his reflection in a silver letter opener. You've seen his latest manuscript, I asked. Seen. My dear Mr. Goodwin, not even Miss Broom has seen it. Merrow worked in seclusion, claimed it would be revolutionary. That word covers all sins. He rose, signalling the end of our literary conference. If you'll excuse me, we're on deadline. Try the editorial floor. Someone may know which bar he frequented. I thanked him politely, which for me takes effort, and made my way down the corridor. The editorial department was a carnival of paper. Secretaries clattered typewriters with professional despair. Ashtrays overflowed with the ashes of bright ideas. A small woman with mouse-brown hair and nerves to match looked up from a desk buried under galley proofs. You're looking for someone, she said. I usually am. Nancy Loring? She nodded, pushing up her glasses. Mr. Merrow's editor. Or I was. Her voice carried the weight of overdue invoices and sleepless nights. She gestured toward an empty desk opposite hers. That was Julian's space when he came in. He liked to work here sometimes, claimed the noise helped him think. I stepped over, scanning the mess. The desk was neat, too neat. Only a typewriter sat center stage, ribbon spooled the wrong way, as if someone had been in a hurry or confused about technology. Was he depressed? I asked. She shook her head. No, excited. The book would change everything, he said. He wouldn't say what that meant. I told him some things are better left unchanged. She gave a small, nervous laugh. He didn't agree. You ever read it? Only fragments, and I wish I hadn't. That got my attention. Why? Because he was writing about people, real ones. Here, if it came out, it would ruin them, and him. I bent to look at the typewriter. The ribbon spool was reversed, wound from the wrong side. I pulled a corner of carbon paper from the wastebasket, one torn scrap with a faint line that caught the light. Truth will change him. Who's him? I asked. Nancy blinked. I don't know. Maybe Alan Bond. Maybe God. Julian liked double meanings. I pocketed the scrap, strictly as a photostat candidate, and smiled. Mind if I borrow this? For spiritual enlightenment. She gave a wan grin. If you find any, send me some. I left her to her typewriters and nerves and stopped by the reception desk. The receptionist was still polishing her vowels. Miss Broom's quite the beauty, she said uninvited. But trouble. Always whispering with Mr. Merrow. I'd say she'll be next to vanish. There was your red herring for the morning, an office gossip with perfect timing. Back outside, the sun had turned Madison into a griddle. I decided the brownstone's shade and Wolfe's lectures were preferable to literary civilization. By the time I got home, it was 12:45, and Fritz was setting the dining room for lunch. Veal paprika, the aroma doing its best to redeem humanity. Wolfe was in the office reading the Times, which meant he was pretending not to anticipate food. Well, he asked without looking up. Merrow's publisher says he's eccentric, his editor says he's dangerous, and the receptionist says Miss Broom's next on the missing list. He lowered the paper a fraction. Gossip is not evidence. Neither are orchids, I said, but you spend 2 hours a day with them. He grunted. Report. I gave him the outline. Bond's frost, Nancy's fear, the backward ribbon. When I mentioned the carbon scrap, he lifted a brow. You removed it? Not evidence, just waste paper. Besides, it says something curious. Truth will change him. Meaningless, he said. Maybe, or prophetic. At that moment, Fritz announced lunch. Wolfe rose as though gravity offended him. Attend me, Archie. The digestion of a meal is improved by conversation, however vapid. Over stew and rolls, he picked apart the clues like bones. Miss Broom's account remains dubious. The missing manuscript may exist, but not necessarily its danger. Writers often confuse importance with melodrama. Maybe, I said, but people don't usually vanish over adjectives. He ignored that. You will retrieve the manuscript before dinner. Retrieve? Boss, the guy's apartment's locked and the police probably have first dibs. Then improvise. He dabbed his lips. And do not allow Miss Broom to distract you. Her tears are as tactical as a headline. I saluted with my spoon. You wound me. I'm immune to charm. He regarded me with something close to pity. Immunity, Mr. Goodwin, like chastity, is a myth frequently proclaimed by those least endowed with it. After lunch, I typed my notes, summarizing the morning's carnival. At 2:30, I carried them to his desk. Wolfe read in silence, fingers steepled. When he finished, he closed the folder gently, the way a judge closes a coffin. Truth will change him, he repeated, an ambiguous phrase. If Merrow intended confession, perhaps the manuscript names his own crime. Or someone else's, I offered. He nodded once. Precisely. You will visit the man's apartment tomorrow. Saul may accompany you. Do not, under any circumstance, remove original material. A photostat will suffice, I grinned. You say that like I need reminding. He eyed me. You do. The phone rang. Fritz answered and entered a moment later. For you, Mr. Goodwin. A woman. Which one? I asked. She did not say. I took the call. A soft, strained voice came through. Mr. Goodwin, this is Nancy Loring. Please don't tell Mr. Bond I called. Someone's been in my office since you left. When? Just now. My papers. My drawers open. They took nothing, but I found a cigarette butt. Turkish blend. Julian hated those. Call the police, I said. No, they'd tell Bond. Just be careful. She hung up before I could answer. I turned to Wolfe. Editor says someone's prowling. Could be our missing author back for rewrites. He frowned. Unlikely. Still, inform Saul. Have him watch her office discreetly. That was Wolfe's version of concern. The rest of the afternoon slid by in silence, broken only by the whir of the ceiling fan and Wolfe's muttering over the Gazette crossword. At 6 sharp he rang the bell cord. Fritz appeared with beer chilled to perfection. I poured, he sipped, and civilization briefly resumed. "Well?" I said. "Any sudden insight?" He set down the glass. "Yes. Humanity's appetite for fiction exceeds its tolerance for truth. Both may prove fatal." "That's deep," I said. "Shall I carve it on the mantel?" He glared. "Confound it, Archie. Manuscripts have precipitated murder before. Consider the Dead Sea Scrolls." "Those weren't novels." He ignored the correction. "Be wary. Manuscripts kill as efficiently as bullets." That line earned its place in the archives right there. He rose, slow and heavy, for his orchid hour. "Tomorrow, at 9, we continue. See that your notes are legible." "Sure. Shall I title them The Case of the Killer Typewriter?" He paused at the elevator. "Mr. Goodwin, wit without discipline is vandalism." "Thanks, boss," I said. "I'll frame it." The elevator doors closed on his frown, and I turned back to my desk, flipping the carbon scrap between my fingers. The faint words caught the lamplight again. Truth will change him. Who him was, I didn't know. But if experience had taught me anything, it was that the truth usually changed someone for the worse. At 6:30 in the morning, the only sound I want to hear is coffee meeting cup. Instead, the phone on my nightstand jangled like it owed the landlord rent. I answered, ready to insult whoever was calling at that hour, and got Inspector Kramer's voice. Gravel, nicotine, and no patience. "Goodwin, you working a case for a Miss Evelyn Broom?" "Depends who's asking," I said, which was brave for a man still horizontal. "Don't get cute. There's a stiff down in Soho name of Julian Merrow. Your Miss Broom's been crying wolf, maybe literally. Tell your boss I want him kept out of this, but I figured you'd want to see for yourself." He hung up before I could promise to bring donuts. Fritz was already humming in the kitchen when I came down. I grabbed coffee, dodged his disapproval about no breakfast, and told him to tell Wolfe I'd be back before orchid hour. When I got to the Soho address, an apartment over a print shop, the sun was barely awake, but the police were. Uniforms guarded the door, and Pearly Stebbins loomed inside like a monument to bad mornings. "Goodwin," he said, eyeing me. "You vultures sure fly early." "I'm flattered you count me among the birds of prey," I told him, stepping over the threshold. "What have we got?" "Male, white, 38, Julian Merrow. Shot once, close range, no sign of struggle. Robbery, maybe." The place looked like a writer's mausoleum. Half-drunk coffee cups, open books, papers littered like snowdrifts. A typewriter sat centre stage on the desk, the carriage halfway through a sentence that would never finish. Merrow himself was face down near the window, shirt soaked dark. The air had that mixed smell of ink and finality. I'd seen corpses before, but this one looked insulted by the interruption. I crouched beside the desk. "No signs of forced entry," I said. "He knew whoever it was." Stebbins snorted. "You a detective now?" "I moonlight," I said. "Any idea when he died?" "Medical examiner says between 10 and midnight." That timing put him square in Miss Broom's evening. Interesting. I wandered to the desk again. The top drawer was open, papers torn and scattered. On closer look, half the pages had been retyped. Same text, different font. Someone had been revising his words after he stopped breathing. "Pearly, what's your angle on this?" Guy lived alone. Maybe he walked in on a burglar. Or maybe the woman got tired of waiting for a happy ending. I gave him my best grin. "You've been reading too many dime novels." He grunted, lighting a cigar that probably doubled as insect repellent. The body was being photographed when a young patrolman brought over a small evidence bag. Inside, a broken pencil and a spent .32 shell. Nothing fancy, just efficient. "Gun?" I asked. "Not here," Stebbins said. "Maybe your client took it." I filed that under insults disguised as theories. I leaned close to the typewriter. A half sheet of carbon paper clung to the roller, the line only half typed. "Truth will change him." I'd seen that phrase yesterday on the scrap from the publisher's office. It was enough to send a chill down the spine, even one fortified with coffee. The phone on the desk rang suddenly, startling the patrolman. Stebbins grabbed it, barked a hello, listened, and thrust it toward me. "It's your boss." "Archie," Wolfe said, his voice smooth as buttered granite. "I trust you're not contaminating evidence." "Just admiring the decor," I said. "Our author's dead. Shot clean, no gun. Desk's been ransacked. Someone retyped his work after the fact. That, Wolfe said, is grotesque. Describe the alterations. Different typewriter, same manuscript. Somebody wanted to rewrite him permanently. Wolfe grunted. Collect your impressions and return. Touch nothing else. Sure. Shall I pick up breakfast on the way back? Do not be flippant before the dead, he said, and hung up. Stebbins eyed me. Wolfe sending you out now? That's new. Thought he didn't leave his throne. He doesn't. I'm the field division. Field division, huh? Then take this. He handed me an envelope. Coroner's preliminary report. Don't lose it. Kramer will want Wolfe's take whether he admits it or not. Touching, I said, tucking it away. By the time I left, the city was fully awake. Traffic grumbled, vendors shouted, and the world didn't give a damn about a writer who'd used his last metaphor. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, robe buttoned to the chin, hands folded like a disappointed Buddha. Fritz had just brought in a tray, coffee for me, beer for him. I gave the summary, detail by detail. Wolfe listened without interruption, eyes closed. When I finished, he opened them. A man slain among words, apt and distasteful. Kramer's calling it robbery. Kramer, Wolfe said, is industrious but unimaginative. Robbery offends probability. Did you see signs of theft? Not unless the killer wanted old drafts. Cash, watch, typewriter, all there. He nodded. Then the motive resides in the writing, an editorial murder. Nice headline, I said. We'll sell it to the Gazette. Archie. His tone could have ironed a shirt. Sarcasm does not advance deduction. Neither does fasting. Shall I order lunch early? Don't be absurd. It is 12:05. Forgive me. Murder upsets my metabolism. He ignored that. Send for Mr. Pantzer. He will locate any carbons or duplicates of Mero's manuscript. Someone revised after his death. Those revisions are our only dialogue with the killer. Saul'll love that. Hunting ghosts through stationery stores. Also, Wolfe added, confirm Miss Broom's movements last evening. She said Connecticut. He lifted an eyebrow. Did she indeed? While he dictated a memo for Pantzer, I phoned a couple of cab companies and one friendly bellhop at the Astor. By noon, the picture was shifting. Evelyn Broom hadn't been in Connecticut. She'd been in Manhattan, taking a cab from the Algonquin to her apartment at 10:40 p.m., 20 minutes before Mero's estimated death. I typed the notes clean, handed them across. Wolfe read slowly, then set the page aside. So, the lady embroidered her alibi. Curious. Could be coincidence, I said. Cabs and clocks aren't moral instruments. Phooey, she lied. Maybe she was scared. That is no excuse. Fear is merely the confession of ignorance. Sometimes it's also self-preservation, I said. If she thought he was in danger, maybe she wanted distance. He studied me. You are defending her? Not exactly, just giving her the benefit of the doubt. His lips curved slightly, which for Wolfe counts as a grin. My. Sentiment from Mr. Goodwin. This case is already corrupting reason. Don't worry, I'll survive. He reached for his beer, raising it in a gesture half toast, half judgment. The test of intelligence, Archie, is to change one's mind in the face of evidence. I intend to determine whether mine is still capable. That sounds suspiciously like optimism. Call it professional vanity. Fritz appeared at the doorway. Lunch is ready, Herr Wolfe. Thank God, I said. At least Fritz never lies. Wolfe rose, heavy and deliberate. There is no virtue in truth alone, Archie, only in how one uses it. Sure, I said. But in my experience, the people who use it best are the ones holding the gun. He paused at the dining room door. A cynical remark, but not unworthy. Eat. Then we pursue Miss Broom's embroidery. When he vanished inside, I stayed back a minute, looking at the neat desk, the phone, and the folder marked Mero. The case was getting crowded, with manuscripts, motives, and one too pretty liar. I jotted one more note in my log before joining him. Observation. Wolfe's interest in this one isn't just professional. Something about the idea of rewriting truth is hitting him where he lives. And if he ever does change his mind, I'd like to be out of the blast radius. If you've never seen a man worship veal paprika, watch Nero Wolfe at 1 o'clock on a Thursday. Fritz had outdone himself. Tender slices of veal, the sauce glowing a sinful shade of red, paprika floating in the air like incense at a cathedral for gluttons. I was halfway through my second beer, mostly because the first hadn't lasted long enough to see me through the argument Wolfe was conducting with the sauce. "You are," he announced between forkfuls, "the most exasperating combination of ignorance and impertinence I have ever endured." I leaned back. All because I suggested the motive might be literary jealousy. It's practically a tradition. Authors stab with typewriters and call it criticism. He dabbed his lips, glaring. "Jealousy implies imagination, Archie, a trait rare among publishers. They are merchants of envy, not victims of it." That was Wolfe in full sermon mode, beer in reach, wit sharpened like a carving knife. I was about to point out that envy had kept more publishers in mink than genius ever did, when the bell rang. Fritz appeared, immaculate as ever, and announced, "Mr. Panzer is here." Wolfe sighed. "Show him in, and for the love of order, clear the table. I cannot discuss murder in the presence of artistry." Saul Panzer entered with his usual economy of motion, flat cap, raincoat, and an expression that suggested he'd already solved 3 minor crimes on his way up the steps. He handed Wolfe a manila envelope. "Report from Greenwich Village," he said. "Our boy Nero was keeping late hours at a writers' club called the Inkwell, mostly poets and drunks. He argued there with a man nobody recognized. Topic was plagiarism and conscience. Got heated enough that the bartender called it philosophy and cut them off." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Did this club maintain membership lists?" "None official," Saul said. "It's more of a gathering spot. They keep sign-in books for vanity. I copied Nero's last entry." He passed over a small page torn from a notebook. "Tuesday, argued with Judas again." I whistled. "Judas, huh?" Either symbolic or the guy's parents had a sense of humour. Saul continued. "I checked Nero's apartment building again. Nothing new, but I did find this in a wastebasket behind the club." He pulled out a thick folded sheet of carbon paper and laid it on Wolfe's blotter. "Part of the missing manuscript. At least it looks like it." I leaned closer. The text was crisp, typed clean, but it wasn't Nero's usual brand of moral fireworks. The first line read, "I loved him, and I killed him." "That's not his style," I said. "Too plain for a man who thought commas were acts of courage." Wolfe read on silently, lips compressing. Finally he said, "These are not Nero's words. They echo Miss Broom's phrasing, but typed on Miss Loring's machine. Someone coached the voice to sound like hers." "Evelyn Broom's?" I asked. He nodded. "A confession draft, unsigned, unmailed, and unconvincing." I turned to Saul. "Where exactly did you find it?" "In a paper sack marked Returns Inkwell Club. Either someone planted it there or Nero was editing it himself." That was enough to make even Wolfe push aside his napkin. He stared at the page like it had personally offended him. "Mr. Panzer, retain possession of the original. Give Mr. Goodwin a photostat for Inspector Kramer." Saul nodded and withdrew. Wolfe rang for beer, and Fritz appeared with the precision of a Swiss clock. "2 bottles," Wolfe said. "I require fortification before enduring official intrusion." Fritz poured, the glasses misting under the office light. Wolfe took one, sipped, and said, "Archie, our Miss Broom is either a victim of extraordinary coincidence or an artisan of deceit." "She said she never wrote a word of fiction," I reminded him. "Then she has developed the talent suddenly and lethally." I was reaching for a cracker when the front bell chimed again. Fritz reappeared, wordless, but his expression announced that civilization had just been invaded. "Inspector Kramer," he said. "Phooey," Wolfe muttered, setting down his beer. "Show him in." Kramer came in like a man walking into a dental office, grim, resigned, and ready to bite something if necessary. He still had the same cigar stub welded to his teeth. "Wolfe," he said, "you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "My nose," Wolfe said, "belongs wherever truth resides. Sit, Inspector." Kramer didn't sit. He eyed me. "You were at Nero's flat. I told you to stay clear." "Yeah," I said, "and I told you coffee's better with sugar. We're both hopeless cases." He grunted, pulling the cigar. "What's this I hear about a confession?" Wolfe motioned toward the envelope Saul had left. "You hear too quickly. I have only fragments, an unsigned draft, possibly written by Miss Broom. You may examine the copy." Kramer took the photostat, flipped through it and frowned. This could be anything. You sure it's hers? No, Wolfe said. But the prose bears her fingerprints, stylistic if not literal. It reads like guilt trying on virtue for size. Kramer gave a short bark of a laugh. You'd make a fine preacher if you weren't so lazy. Not lazy, Wolfe corrected. Selective. The exchange had enough static to power a radio. I tried to ease it with charm. We're all on the same page, Inspector. You've got a murder, we've got curiosity. Call it a joint edition. Kramer ignored me, still studying the pages. You know, this doesn't make sense. If she wrote this, why hide it in a club trash can? Wolfe replied, because confession, like art, requires an audience. She intended it to be found, just not yet. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Or maybe you planted it. I stiffened, but Wolfe lifted a hand, silencing me. You insult both my dignity and your own procedure. You know I do not traffic in evidence. Kramer exhaled, half smoke, half apology. All right. You're too proud to fake clues, but you'd bend the rules if it got you the truth. Truth, Wolfe said, is not elastic. Emotion, however, is, and emotion clouds justice. Kramer slid the papers back in the envelope. So does pride. He snapped his notebook shut. And I'm taking that gold pen of yours as evidence. Maybe it'll tell the truth faster than you will. Their eyes met, two professionals separated by temperament, not purpose. After a moment, Wolfe said softly, Then let us both endeavour to restrain ours. Kramer pocketed the photostat and headed for the door. I'll have forensics check the typewriter source. If it matches Merrow's machine, I'll be back. I await you, Wolfe said. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled. Well, that went almost polite. You didn't even threaten to sue. I reserve litigation for worthier opponents, I grinned. Want me to call Miss Broom and ask why her handwriting's moonlighting as murder? No, he said. Let her stew. The longer she waits, the more revealing her next move will be. He poured the last inch of beer and stared into it like it contained prophecy. Authorship, Archie, he murmured, is a treacherous business. To write a life, one must own it or steal it. The same applies to guilt. I leaned back. That's poetic, coming from a man who reads the dictionary for pleasure. He gave me a sidelong glance. Do not mistake lucidity for poetry. Fine, I said. Then what's our next lucid move? Eat dinner at 8. Before that, nothing. My digestion requires peace. You mean while you think? He didn't deny it. At 4, he vanished to the plant rooms. I stayed at my desk, typing notes and considering the page in Saul's envelope. I loved him, and I killed him. Maybe it was fiction, maybe confession, but either way, somebody had edited the truth, and not for publication. At 5:59 sharp, I heard the elevator descending. Fritz's footsteps followed, the unspoken signal that orchid hour was over, and dinner was about to be dignified. Wolfe entered, expression serene again. Archie, he said, inform Mr. Pantzer to watch Miss Broom discreetly. A woman capable of such composition is seldom idle. Sure, I said. You think she'll write another confession? He reached for his napkin. I think she will act one. That was Wolfe's version of a drum roll. Fritz appeared with the tray and the smell of roast duck filled the office. Wolfe took a deep breath, his version of saying, case adjourned. I raised my beer glass. To publishing, the only business where betrayal comes with royalties. Wolfe sniffed. Cynicism is a luxury of the ignorant. Then I'm rich, I said, and took a long swallow. He closed his eyes and said, Archie, do stop talking. That was my cue. I shut up, and the case simmered quietly under the scent of paprika and the hum of a man who preferred sauce to sentiment. Wolfe bumped the apartment visit to the afternoon. Landlord not in till noon, so I swung by Sterling and Bond first. If there's one thing publishing offices and morgues have in common, it's the smell of final drafts. The next morning found me climbing the stairs to Sterling and Bond again, where the air reeked of cigarette smoke, fear, and overworked typewriters. The receptionist gave me a smile like a press release, warm and meaningless, and waved me toward the editorial floor. Nancy Loring's door was half open. She was perched behind her desk like a sparrow that had flown through a storm, eyes red, lipstick trembling on the edge of a cup. The perfume that met me halfway across the room had ambition. It was trying to fight the cigarette smoke and losing. She started when she saw me. "Mr. Goodwin, I didn't expect—" "That makes two of us," I said, closing the door. "Relax, I'm not here to revoke your library card. Just a few questions about Julian Merrow." Her fingers twitched toward the ashtray. "The police were already here. I told them everything." "Maybe, but the police don't always ask the right questions." She gave a nervous laugh. "And you do?" "I try. Keeps me out of choir practice." Her attempt at humour died quickly. She gestured to the pile of galley proofs on her desk. "I'm finishing work that should have been his." I glanced at the top page and froze. The title glared back at me in bold black type, "The Case That Changed His Mind." "Well, that's cosy," I said. Merrow named his own epitaph after our story. She dropped ash onto the margin, scattering grey flakes like punctuation. "He said it was his best work. Said it would be his last. I didn't think he meant it literally." "Let's hope he didn't write the ending himself." Her eyes flicked up. "You think Evelyn Broom did?" "I think a lot of things," I said. "Why don't you tell me about the confession pages you edited?" Her face drained of colour. "How did you—" "Let's call it professional gossip. Saul Pantzer found a copy near that club in the village." She crushed her cigarette and reached for another, lighting it with shaking hands. "Julian asked me to edit them. He said they were research for the novel. He wanted a woman's phrasing. Authentic guilt, he called it." "Whose guilt?" She looked down at the papers, voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't say. I thought it was fiction. But after he died—" I waited, but she didn't finish. "Go on." "I reread them last night. The tone, the details, it's Evelyn's voice. Every line could have been written by her." "Then she either dictated or inspired it. That doesn't make her a murderer." "No," Nancy said, "but it makes her a muse with blood on her hands." I moved closer, careful not to spook her. "You still have the galley with his revisions?" She handed it over reluctantly, her fingers brushing mine. The paper was smudged, creased at the corners. One page caught my eye. On the lower margin, a faint fingerprint glistened under the lamplight, smeared in violet ink. "New fashion in fingerprints?" I asked. She leaned over. "That wasn't there yesterday." "Then someone's been proofreading after hours." She looked stricken. "Oh, God. You think he or she came back for it?" "I think Manhattan has too many keys floating around. Whose office copies these proofs?" "Only mine and Mr. Bond's." "Of course," I said. "Nothing says teamwork like a double lock." Nancy drew hard on her cigarette, leaving a tremor of smoke between us. "You don't understand. This book, Julian said it would expose people. He meant real names. If that's true, anyone connected to it could be in danger." "Or already is," I said. "You heard what happened to him." She nodded, biting her lip. "Yes, and I keep thinking, what if he was right? What if the story killed him?" That was the sort of line pulp magazines paid good money for. Unfortunately, we were in the non-fiction section now. I tucked the galley into my briefcase. "I'll take this to Mr. Wolfe. Maybe he can tell whether the killer used a pen or a plot twist." As I turned to go, she reached out suddenly. "Mr. Goodwin, please, be careful. Whoever did this isn't finished." "I've got a boss who'd agree," I said. "That's why he pays me in cynicism." She gave a ghost of a smile. "Then maybe you'll live longer." The line had possibilities, but the perfume was giving me a headache. I left her to her typewriter and panic. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already in the office, a book in one hand and a cold bottle of beer in the other. The afternoon sunlight made the windows glow like stage lamps. I set the galley on his desk. "Miss Loring says these were Merrow's final edits. You might call them his last words." He adjusted his glasses and peered down. "The case that changed his mind." His mouth twitched. "Pretentious. Coming from a man who writes grocery lists in Latin, that's rich." "Silence," he said mildly. He began to read aloud, slowly, the words rolling out like he was dissecting them for impurities. "She confessed in the hope of absolution, not knowing that truth itself demands blood." He stopped, eyes narrowing. "Archie, when were these written?" "Before he died." "Then we have an obscenity." "Sure," I said, "but I'd like to know who's obscene to whom." He ignored me and continued reading. "Her confession was my salvation, though it required my death." "Sounds autobiographical to me," I said. If the man predicted his own murder, we can skip the investigation and call it prophecy. He laid the pages flat. Fiction preceding fact. Intolerable. That's what I love about you, boss, I said. You get philosophical about homicide. He gave me a look that could have withered an oak. Do not trivialize what you fail to comprehend. This, he tapped the galley, is an inversion of order. Art should reflect reality, not preempt it. Fine, I said. Then maybe reality should stop borrowing its plots from murder mysteries. He exhaled through his nose. Archie, your levity is a perversion of logic. Fetch the magnifying glass. I did. He examined the violet fingerprint on the margin. Ink of this hue is uncommon, favoured by artists and, coincidentally, by Miss Broom. But hers is the common pelican blend. This shade is Bond's private batch, ordered through his stationer. So it's hers. Or someone imitating her, a device to implicate, not identify. I leaned back. If this keeps up, we'll need a glossary just to keep the lies straight. He frowned. A book within a book, confessions folded like pastry. Each layer conceals another flavour of deceit. Then call it Murder a la Mode, I said. He almost smiled. A vulgar title, yet apt. Coming soon to a crime shelf near you, I said. And what do we do with Miss Loring? She has served her purpose. Fear makes her pliable. Leave her. That's cold, even for you. He gave me a look of surprising softness. No, Archie. Protection sometimes requires ignorance. I will not drag her further into this tangle until necessity compels. That was Wolfe's version of compassion, logic wrapped in velvet. I poured him a fresh beer and one for myself. So, where does that leave us? He lifted his glass, watching the bubbles rise. Balanced precariously on conjecture, the book foretells a death, the confession contradicts itself, and the ink betrays more than the words. Translation, you're stumped. His lips twitched again, momentarily. At that moment, Fritz appeared silently in the doorway, announcing dinner with his usual elegance. The scent of roast chicken drifted through, reminding the universe that even philosophy must yield to appetite. Wolfe set down the galley proofs, reached for his cane, and stood with imperial reluctance. We shall dine, he said, and afterward I will decide whether literature is fit to survive the century. Just so long as beer makes the cut, I said. He shot me a glare, but there was the faintest glimmer in his eye. Mr. Goodwin, you are incorrigible. Sure, I said, but at least I'm entertaining. He grunted, halfway to the elevator. When he was gone, I sat at the desk, the galley still spread before me. The violet print winked under the lamp. Somewhere in those pages was a murderer who wrote his or her alibi in advance. And if Wolfe was right, the next chapter hadn't been written yet. The phone started ringing at 9:30 sharp. Too early for bad news, too late for good. Wolfe was still upstairs with the orchids, which meant I was stuck with it. When I picked up, Kramer's voice came through like gravel under a boot. Goodwin, you sitting down? I am now, I said. You sound like a man about to ruin breakfast. Forget breakfast. Your editor friend, Nancy Loring, she's dead. That pulled me upright. How? Gas. Apartment sealed tight. Looks like suicide. And you don't buy it. Would you? No, I said. She just got promoted to terrified, not fatalistic. Then haul your boss out of bed. I want Wolfe's eyes on this. And don't pull your usual stunts. I'll have men on site. He hung up, proving optimism was wasted on policemen. When Wolfe came down at 10, I relayed the news. His face didn't move, but the air got heavier. Suicide indeed, he said. Miss Loring had the spine of a pigeon, but she clung to life like a limpet. No, Mr. Goodwin, you will remain here. I shall await Inspector Kramer's report. Sure, I said. I'll wait right here. 5 minutes later, I was in a cab, headed for her building. Nancy's apartment was on the 4th floor of a brick block that smelled like a mixture of varnish and despair. The door wasn't locked. Kramer's men had been and gone, but a uniform at the threshold gave me a look that said I was about to step into trouble. Press? He asked. Private inquiry, I said. Don't faint. I'm legitimate. He shrugged and let me pass. The room was small, square and smoky. Gas still hung in the air, thin and metallic. The windows were taped around the edges with newspaper, and the typewriter on the table had fallen sideways, as though it had fainted from shame. Nancy Loring lay on the floor beside it, hair loose, eyes half open, a cup of coffee overturned near one hand. "If this was suicide," I said to nobody, "I'm a ballerina." The uniform outside snorted, "You look the wrong size for a tutu." I crouched near the typewriter, careful not to touch the body. The keys were spotted with ink smears and fingerprints, one of which shimmered faintly violet under the light, the same shade we'd seen on Merrow's manuscript pages. "Well, Miss Loring," I muttered, "either you had a fondness for fancy ink, or somebody wanted you in the same club as your author." A gust of air rattled the taped window, and I shivered despite the heat. The ribbon had been yanked halfway out of its spool, like someone had been erasing evidence in a hurry. I slipped on a pair of gloves, insurance policy, and pulled the carbon free, folding it flat before tucking it into my pocket. Technically not police evidence yet, just a souvenir of my bad manners. I stood, gave the room a slow once-over. A single coffee cup, lipstick mark on the rim, a torn calendar page on the wall, yesterday's date circled. In the ashtray, one cigarette burned halfway down, Turkish blend, same as at Merrow's place. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidence had been showing up to work a lot lately. I heard heavy steps on the landing and didn't need to guess. Pearly Stebbins lumbered in, cigar already smoking. "Goodwin," he said. "Figures. We find a body, you find a way in." "Habit," I said. "It's either this or crossword puzzles." He looked around, squinting. "You were told to stay put." "I was also told prohibition would last forever. Some orders are made to be broken," he grunted, poking at the taped window. "Suicide, clear enough. Gas jet open, door locked from inside." "Yeah?" And the typewriter jumped off the table on its own. He glared. She was shaky. Maybe she fell. Or maybe someone helped her fall. What's your lab say? "Still working. And before you ask, Kramer's in a mood. He doesn't like suicides that smell like murder." "Neither do I said. "Then get out before I forget I like you less than him." That sounded like affection from Stebbins, so I left. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in the office, an unopened bottle of beer at his elbow. That's the Wolfe version of pacing. "Your disobedience," he said, "has become tedious." "Then it's mutual," I told him. "Nancy Loring's dead all right, but the scene's faker than a Broadway accent. Same violet ink fingerprints on her typewriter." He inhaled slowly. "The same?" "Identical hue, and she used the same Turkish cigarettes as Merrow." He leaned back, eyes narrowing to slits. "You retrieved the ribbon?" "Of course." "Archie," his tone was pure acid, "one day your enterprise will cost me my digestion." "Maybe, but it'll save your case notes." He reached for the bell cord and yanked it once. Fritz appeared at the doorway, looking like Switzerland during wartime. "Beer," Wolfe said. "2." When the glasses came, Wolfe handed me one instead of the lecture I deserved. That was his idea of forgiveness. He drank, wiped his lips, and said, "So, Miss Loring is silenced. The instrument of her trade becomes the instrument of her death. This is no coincidence." "I thought you didn't believe in literary symbolism." "I despise it," he said, "but others do not. The murderer plays editor to reality. First Merrow, then Miss Loring, each struck from the page when inconvenient." I whistled softly. "And Miss Broom?" "She remains the reader, terrified, complicit, or both." I sat down. "All right, but why the violet fingerprints? Leaving them around like autographs isn't smart." "Indeed. Therefore the intent was not concealment, but advertisement. Someone wishes us to see the pattern." "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Wolfe said, "that our killer is composing." He fell silent, gazing at nothing. When Wolfe thinks, you can hear the furniture breathe. Finally he said, "I must reconsider certain assumptions. I had dismissed the manuscript as melodrama. Now it appears prophetic." "That's your way of saying I was right about the publishing motive?" "It is my way," he said coldly, "of saying that I was wrong." That was rarer than Fritz burning toast. He picked up the ribbon I'd brought and unrolled a section, holding it up to the light. "Here, the last sentence she typed." I squinted. "Can you read that mess?" He nodded. "Chapter 14, the end of the beginning." "Well," I said, "at least she had a sense of irony." He set it down, fingers steepled. "Archie, We are dealing with a mind that confuses authorship with omnipotence. It revises life itself. Sounds like half the editors I know. He didn't smile. This case, Mr. Goodwin, is altering something far more perilous than fiction. It is altering me. I blinked. That's a first. You getting introspective? Phooey, I am merely acknowledging infection. I am beginning to care. That deserved a grin. You're almost human, boss. Phooey, he repeated. A dangerous slander. We drank in silence. Outside, the city was humming its usual mid-morning tune. Taxis, horns, a typewriter somewhere pounding out another tragedy. Inside, the air smelled of orchids, ink, and trouble. Wolfe reached for the bell cord again. Fritz will prepare luncheon early. Then I shall review Mero's manuscript again. Perhaps the dead left us a footnote. Mind if I read over your shoulder? Only if you refrain from comment. That's like asking the sun not to rise. He looked at me, exasperation and something else, maybe trust behind the frown. Archie, your irreverence is a form of loyalty. Try to keep it survivable. He turned toward the elevator, slow and solid, carrying with him the faint scent of beer and thought. I finished my glass, set it down, and watched the bubbles fade. The case had turned a corner, straight into a wall. 2 writers down, 1 trembling agent left, and Wolfe beginning to believe in emotions. Somewhere between the gas fumes and violet ink, a killer was writing the next chapter, and I had the feeling I'd be in it. By the time Saul called that night, the city had sunk into the kind of damp darkness that sticks to your collar and tries to talk you into a bad idea. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, communing with nature's least conversational species, and I was keeping company with a sandwich that had more mustard than sense when the phone rang. "Goodwin," Saul said, his voice calm as always. "Got your man." "Alive?" "Mostly. Name's Roger Vale, critic, sometimes writer, full-time drinker. He's holed up at the Halcyon Bar on 48th, nursing his ego and a double rye." "Nice address. I'll bring him home a souvenir napkin if he confesses." "Better bring a notebook," Saul said. "He's got plenty to say." 15 minutes later, I was pushing through the Halcyon's door into a fog thick enough to grow orchids in. The bar was one of those places where failed poets come to drown their vocabulary. The jukebox was dead, the air smoky, and the only thing shining was the bartender's bald head under the neon. Roger Vale sat near the end, wrapped in a brown suit that had given up the ghost around 1942. His tie hung like it was ashamed of him. He glanced up when I slid onto the stool beside him. "Archie Goodwin," I said. "You've got a fan club, but they're all in homicide." He smirked. "I was wondering when one of you literary bloodhounds would track me down. Buy me a drink, and I'll tell you who shot Hemingway." "Tempting," I said, nodding to the bartender. 2 rye. And don't water it. This man looks like he's already half evaporated." Vale chuckled, low and bitter. "You're not a cop." "No, just a man with curiosity and a boss who hates being puzzled." "Ah, Wolfe." He said it like invoking a god he didn't believe in. He's still hiding behind those orchids. "Only during business hours. You knew Mero." "Knew him?" He laughed without mirth. "I created him." "Ambitious statement," I said. "Not ambition, fact." He leaned closer, the whiskey glow turning his eyes mean. "I wrote his first 3 novels, ghosted them. The critics adored him, me, until he decided he didn't need the ghost anymore. Said he'd learned my tricks." "Did he?" "He learned enough to hang himself with adjectives." Vale tossed back the rest of his drink. "When I refused to write more, he started stealing from me outright. Passages, ideas, hell, whole paragraphs. I told Evelyn Broom, she was his agent then, that I'd expose him." "And she?" "She laughed, said she'd expose both of us. Turns out she had a tidy little contract, one that made her silent partner in every cent of our stolen genius." He fished a folded document from his pocket and slapped it on the counter. The paper smelled of whiskey and desperation. "Read it," he said. "Signed by Mero and yours truly. Evelyn witnessed it. 10% of all proceeds to her in exchange for keeping her mouth shut about who wrote what." I unfolded it. The signatures were there all right. Vale's angry scrawl, Mero's pompous loop, and a neat E. Broom in violet ink. "You kept this all these years?" I asked. "Call it insurance, or cowardice. Take your pick." "Insurance usually keeps you alive," I said. "Cowardice doesn't." He gave me a look that said he'd already heard worse. When Nero died, I thought my problems did too. Then Nancy Loring turns up dead, and I start feeling nostalgic for the electric chair. Did Evelyn threaten you recently? She didn't have to. Her silence is its own weapon. Every time I look at a blank page, I hear her voice reminding me who I used to be. I picked up the contract. Mind if I borrow this? Be my guest. It's cursed. He reached for his lighter, flicking it open with trembling fingers. As the flame caught, I saw the logo on his matchbook. The Astoria Midtown Hotel. My stomach tightened. That was 3 blocks from Merrow's building. Friend of yours live there? I asked. Occasionally me, he said. They rent by the week. Handy when you're trying to avoid the landlord or the law. I pocketed the matchbook and stood. Thanks for the literature lesson. You should get some sleep. Vale smiled crookedly. Sleep's for amateurs. I left him there with his whiskey and ghosts, the contract burning a hole in my pocket. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in the office, freshly escaped from the orchids and not happy about it. He was reading the Gazette, which usually meant he was gathering insults. You disobeyed again, he said without looking up. I prefer expanded the scope of inquiry, I told him, handing over the contract. Roger Vale says Evelyn was blackmailing him and Nero. She had a cut of the profits and the patience of a cobra. He adjusted his glasses, reading the signatures slowly. Violet ink again. Same as the fingerprints, I said. Consistent, though hardly conclusive. He set it aside. Describe Mr. Vale. Like a critic who's been reviewed too often. Broke, bitter, and about a shot away from confession. Did he kill Nero? Not unless he's good at time travel. He was in the Astoria Midtown Hotel that night. His matchbook says so. That got Wolfe's eyebrows to move. A rare geological event. A convenient proximity. Perhaps too convenient. You think he's lying? I think he's performing. Critics must always have the last word. Then what's his motive for framing Evelyn? He sighed. Guilt seeks company. I poured myself a beer and dropped into the chair opposite him. You realize every one of these people could headline a Freudian convention. Psychology, he said, is a tool for those who lack reason. Reason's overrated. People don't kill for logic, they kill for story. He looked up sharply. Story. Yeah, everyone in this racket writes lies for a living. One of them just happened to use a gun. He steepled his fingers. Archie, refrain from epigrams when they're accurate. They unsettle me. I grinned. That's progress. You're almost getting poetic. He ignored that, eyes half closed. Mr. Vale's confession complicates the tableau. If Miss Broom was indeed a silent partner, she profited from deception. Yet if she killed, the play becomes trite. I will not tolerate a banal play. Sorry, boss, but murder doesn't always consult your taste. Nevertheless, he said, a crime devoid of art is unworthy of contemplation. He rose, no small feat, and began to pace, his robe sweeping behind him like a curtain closing on Act 1. Saul will confirm Vale's whereabouts that night. Meanwhile, you will examine the Astoria Hotel records discreetly. Do not provoke the police. Kramer's temper is not an inexhaustible resource. Understood, I said, though he's got a pretty generous supply. Wolfe stopped pacing. Archie, consider this. If Miss Broom's guilt is authentic, then my conclusions have erred. That is intolerable. Therefore, until proof compels me, she remains innocent. That was new. Wolfe defending a client on instinct instead of intellect. I couldn't help smiling. You're starting to sound sentimental, he grimaced. Pfui. I am indulging hypothesis, not heartache. Call it what you like. You're changing, boss. He turned toward the window. Change is inevitable. Understanding is optional. At that, Fritz appeared at the doorway. Dinner, gentlemen. Wolfe nodded curtly. Excellent. Mr. Goodwin, you may join me if you can refrain from sermonizing. I'll try, I said, but I make no promises about dessert. He gave me a look that could prune orchids and moved toward the elevator. As he disappeared, I took the contract from the desk and slipped it into an envelope for the safe. Violet ink, Midtown matchbook, and a ghostwriter who couldn't stop haunting himself. Not exactly the kind of bedtime story Wolfe preferred. But as I turned off the light, I had the uneasy feeling he was right. The case wasn't about murder anymore. It was about authorship, who owned the truth, who edited it, and who was willing to kill to keep the final draft. The morning edition hit like a rotten tomato. I opened the door to fetch the mail and found 3 reporters, 1 photographer, and a headline that could give ulcers to a statue: Wolfe hides author's killer. The Gazette's type was big enough to read from New Jersey. "Morning, boys," I said, stepping onto the stoop. "If you're here for autographs, I charge by the inch." "Come on, Goodwin," one of them called. "Is Wolfe shielding the dame or cashing her royalty checks?" "Neither," I said. "He's allergic to hysteria and money's second-hand smoke." Flashbulbs popped. Another voice shouted, "What's he hiding upstairs?" "Orchids," I said. "They're shy." No comment. They laughed, but it was the mean laughter that smells like ink and coffee. Somebody lobbed another question about corruption in private detection, and I closed the door on them before temptation got me indicted. Inside, the brownstone felt like a church after a riot, quiet, dim, and guilty of nothing. Wolfe was at his desk, the Gazette spread open like a corpse on a slab. Fritz hovered by the archway, looking as if public scandal might curdle the soup. "Lon Cohen called," I said. "He sends regrets and circulation numbers." Wolfe folded the paper carefully, as though it were evidence. "So, Mr. Cohen's profession is now the manufacture of calumny. He says the leak came from an anonymous publishing source." "Bond," Wolfe said at once, voice flat as granite. "No other possesses both motive and vocabulary." The bell rang. I didn't have to guess. Kramer never could resist showing up when the ink was still wet. He came in like a thunderstorm in a rumpled suit, cigar clenched, eyes bloodshot from too little sleep or too much responsibility. "Wolfe," he barked, "you've just won the front page and my headache." "I accept neither prize," Wolfe said. Kramer slapped the Gazette onto the desk. "My commissioner wants results. The DA's office wants a scalp. You're in the crosshairs." Wolfe regarded him coolly. "Then you may inform them that my hide is ample but not available." Kramer's jaw tightened. "Don't be clever. I could get a warrant to drag that manuscript out of here." Wolfe lifted one eyebrow. "Indeed. You might first locate it. I do not possess it." "You're splitting hairs." "I am preserving law," Wolfe said, "something your office occasionally mislays." I stepped in before Kramer's blood pressure detonated. "Easy, Inspector. You start yelling, Fritz will revoke lunch." Kramer grunted, ignoring me. "The leak says you've been sitting on proof that Evelyn Broom killed Nero." Wolfe's lip curled. "The leak, Inspector, is an idiot. If I possessed proof, you would be here with gratitude, not a warrant." Kramer's voice dropped. "You're probably right, but I still need your hide." "Take my hide, Inspector," Wolfe said softly, "but leave me my reason." That did it. Kramer's shoulders sagged. He blew smoke toward the ceiling like a man exercising patience. "You know, Wolfe, one of these days that tongue of yours is going to get subpoenaed." "Phooey. My tongue, like truth, is its own defense." He turned to go, muttering something about ulcers. As the door closed behind him, Wolfe pressed the bell cord once. Fritz entered with surgical timing. "Beer, sir?" "Yes, 2. When Fritz had gone, Wolfe leaned back, eyes shut. "Archie, read aloud the offending article." I did, giving it the Broadway treatment. "Anonymous sources claim Nero Wolfe is concealing a female suspect connected to the sensational Nero case. Quote, she confessed that truth itself demanded blood." He opened his eyes. "Repeat that." I did. "Those words," Wolfe said, "appear verbatim in Nero's unpublished manuscript." I froze halfway through a sip. "Meaning Bond's leak had access to the manuscript?" He nodded slowly. "Precisely. The leak is the publisher himself." "Well," I said, "that solves one mystery. Who opened his mouth? Now we just have to figure out who opened Nero's chest." His glare was brief but effective. "Restrain frivolity. We now possess motive, opportunity, and audacity. Bond's empire teeters on scandal. Nero's exposé would have ruined him. Miss Broom, the supposed temptress, was his pawn." "Then why kill Nancy Loring?" "To silence the editor who knew too much. Elementary, Archie." "Sure," I said. "Except for one thing." He looked up. "What thing?" "Bond's too polished for hands-on murder. He outsources his dirty work." Wolfe considered that. "Then he must be made to confess by other means." He took a long pull of beer, the glass misting in his grip. "I will have Saul shadow him discreetly. You will prepare a note for Inspector Kramer, purely procedural courtesy." Translation: we feed him just enough to keep him polite. Exactly. Fritz re-entered, collected the empty glass, and withdrew in silence. Wolfe stared at the door a moment before speaking. This clamour, this degradation of privacy, intolerable. "Welcome to fame," I said. "You've hit the tabloids." He ignored me. "For 20 years I have avoided notoriety. Now a jackal in a pinstripe suit drags my name through the gutter." I smiled. "You're taking it personal." He didn't answer right away. He turned the Gazette over, studying the photograph of our front door surrounded by reporters. Then he said quietly, "Yes, personal." That word hung in the air like a loaded gun. "When Wolfe says personal," I said, "somebody's obituary writes itself." He didn't deny it. Instead, he rang for the elevator, rising with deliberate slowness. "I shall tend the orchids. They at least know how to be silent." "Want me to draft your rebuttal to the press?" "No. Let them print their filth. When I'm finished, their retraction will occupy the entire front page." "Big promise," I said. He paused at the elevator gate. "Not promise, Archie. Premonition." The gate clanged shut. The motor hummed, carrying him upward into the calm green sanctum where murder couldn't follow, at least for an hour. Outside, I heard the reporters shouting again, the street alive with rumour. I walked to the window, pulled the blinds, and smiled grimly. They wanted headlines. They'd get them. Because when Wolfe calls a case personal, the city ends up printing the truth in black, and someone else's name in black borders. If there's a polite way to break into a publisher's office, I haven't found it. The trick is to look like you belong there, which, given my wardrobe, wasn't difficult. It was 11:30 at night, and Sterling and Bond's building sat in that sweet spot between last subway noise and first milk delivery, when Manhattan's conscience takes a nap. The lobby guard had already given up on newspapers and was wrestling a crossword. I gave him my best editor working late nod and rode the elevator up to the executive floor, carrying a folded overcoat that might have passed for authority. Alan Bond's office was a monument to self-importance, leather, mahogany, and the kind of dim lighting that makes dishonesty look distinguished. I flicked my penlight across the room. 2 framed photos, Bond shaking hands with authors who hated him, watched from the wall. The safe sat behind a row of leather-bound ledgers, discreet and smug. I took out my tools. Wolfe would call it felonious impropriety. I called it overtime. The lock gave me trouble, expensive trouble, but after 5 minutes it sighed open like a maiden aunt confessing to gin. Inside, contracts, checks, and one thick envelope labelled in Bond's fussy handwriting. Chapter 14, Do Not Release. "Well, well," I murmured. "Even crooks like stationery." I slid it into my inside pocket just as a faint hum reached my ears, an electric purr that wasn't from the city grid. A red bulb winked near the door. Silent alarm. "Lovely," I said. "My timing's better than my luck." Footsteps echoed from the corridor. I cut the light and slipped behind the desk, but my chances of blending with mahogany were slim. The door opened, and Pearlie Stebbins filled it like a freight train in human form. "Goodwin," he said, voice flat as asphalt. I should have guessed. Wolfe's pet ferret. "Evening, Pearlie. Fancy seeing you at story time." He stepped inside, flashlight aimed at my chest. "You've got nerve breaking into a publisher's office. What's in your pocket?" "A cold draft and wounded pride," I said. He wasn't amused. "Don't make me frisk you. You're under arrest for—" The second voice stopped him. "Hold it, Pearlie." Inspector Kramer appeared behind him, trench coat open, cigar lit like a badge of authority. He looked me over, sighed, and said, "You always pick the wrong nights, Goodwin." "Habit," I said. "Wolfe's contagious." "What are you doing here?" "Sightseeing." I heard Bond redecorated. "Cut it." Kramer rubbed his temple. "You tripped the alarm. The building called it in." "Then I'm glad to see you," I said. "You'll want to know what your friend Mr. Bond keeps under lock and moral key." Pearlie growled. "He's bluffing." Kramer studied me, eyes narrowed. "You have something, don't you?" "Maybe." "If I let you walk out, you'll take it to Wolfe." "Probably. And he'll give me heartburn." "That too." For a moment the only sound was the hum of the alarm switch still blinking. Then Kramer muttered a curse, short and heartfelt. "All right, Pearlie, let him go." "What? He's breaking and entering?" "Yeah," Kramer said. "But he's Wolfe's hound, not mine. He's bait, And if I leash him now, I lose my probable cause on Bond's safe log. Let him run. Stebbins scowled but stepped aside. I gave him a grin. Appreciate the hospitality, gentlemen. Kramer jabbed a finger at me. Tell Wolfe he owes me one, and if this stunt backfires, I'll collect with interest. Duly noted. I was out the door before the inspector could change his mind, heart keeping time with the elevator cables. By the time I hit the street, the envelope felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Back at the brownstone, the world was steady again. Warm light, quiet air, and Fritz's faint cinnamon trail from the kitchen. Wolfe was in the office, dictating notes to himself like a Roman emperor preparing edicts. You took long enough, he said without looking up. I stopped for a chat with the NYPD. They send their love. Phooey. His gaze flicked to the envelope in my hand. You succeeded. I broke, entered, and escaped with your bedtime reading. He extended a hand. Give it here. I placed the envelope on his blotter. He examined the handwriting, nostrils flaring. Bond's script, fastidious and fearful. He slit it open with his gold knife, the one that usually reserved duty for roast squab. Inside were typed pages, crisp, single-spaced, the heading clear. Chapter 14, The Case That Changed His Mind. That's our title, I said. Either fate's got a sense of humour, or Bond does. Wolfe began to read aloud, voice resonant, almost ceremonial. Julian Merrow writes these words knowing they may be his last. The truth, like a publisher's contract, binds the soul and strangles the weak. Alan Bond is a thief of thought, a broker of plagiarism, a man whose fortune rests on stolen genius. He paused, eyes glittering. Continue, Archie. I took over, reading faster. The confession attributed to Evelyn Broom was dictated by Bond himself, its purpose to divert suspicion when my book exposes him. If I die before publication, look to the man who profits from silence. I set the pages down slowly. Well, I said, Merrow didn't have to look far. Bond's been editing Murder. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips pressed together. So, the manuscript that began as fiction concludes as evidence. Miss Broom's so-called guilt was counterfeit, her confession forged by Bond to disguise his thefts. And Nancy Loring? A necessary erasure, Wolfe said grimly. The editor who could distinguish true words from false. That's tidy, I said. Too tidy. You sure Merrow wasn't playing prophet? He gave me a look that would have melted ice on the Hudson. You doubt? I breathe. It's part of my job. He sighed, not entirely annoyed. Your skepticism is tonic. However, facts speak. Bond had access, motive, and fear. He also had the gall to accuse me through the press, which I confess provokes my temper. That's new, I said. You taking this one personal again? He didn't answer at once. The clock ticked, loud and patient. Finally he said, Yes, he has trespassed upon both truth and dignity, and he used you, Mr. Goodwin, as his scapegoat. Unforgivable. I'm touched, I said. Does that mean hazard pay? Phooey, it means obedience. Can I fake that too? His eyes narrowed, but a ghost of amusement crossed his face. Sit. We shall prepare our counterstroke. The fulcrum is reached, now we apply weight. As long as it's not mine, I muttered. He ignored that and rang the bell for Fritz. Tomorrow at 10 I will summon Mr. Bond. He will come believing he dictates the narrative. Instead, he will read his own obituary. Want me to handle the invitation? Indeed. Be persuasive. Understood, I said. If he balks, I'll tell him it's a literary review. Wolfe actually smiled. Barely. Excellent. And Archie? Yes? Tonight. Stay in. If the inspector's patience expires, I prefer to surrender you in comfort. I grinned. I'll keep a bag packed. He reached for the manuscript again, eyes scanning the damning pages. The lamp's light turned his face into a study in marble and fury. As for me, I sat back and listened to the paper whisper under his fingers, the sound of truth being unearthed from typewriter ink and greed. Outside, Manhattan kept writing its own chapters in neon and noise, but inside the brownstone the story had changed hands. Wolfe said softly, Archie, when men corrupt the word, they invite ruin. Sure, I said, but they usually make the front page first. He shot me a look that almost counted as affection. Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we shall see who edits whom. And with that, he reached for his beer, sealing the moment the way a king seals a verdict, calm, final, and deadly. By 7:30 that evening, the brownstone had the atmosphere of a courtroom designed by a gourmet. Fritz's silver tray gleamed near Wolfe's desk, holding 4 chilled beer glasses that looked ready for confession. The smell of roast duck floated from the kitchen, making me consider committing a minor felony just to earn a seat at the dining table. Our guests, however, weren't in a dining mood. Evelyn Broom sat rigidly on the red leather chair, pale and polished like marble with pulse. Roger Vale perched near the globe, twisting his matchbook, a Midtown Hotel logo, our little souvenir of guilt, between nervous fingers. Alan Bond stood by the door, the perfect publisher in a perfect suit, except for the faint gleam of sweat at his temple. Inspector Kramer occupied the couch like a granite statue, cigar lit, expression set to official suffering. Wolfe sat behind his desk as if the chair had been carved for Solomon himself. His eyes were half closed, but his mind was wide awake. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice low and grave, "we are assembled for clarification. In publishing, that means correcting error. In murder, it means truth, or penalty." Bond gave a laugh with too much polish on it. "Really, Mr. Wolfe, is this a performance? If so, I prefer my theatre with curtains." Wolfe lifted one eyebrow. "Your preference, sir, is irrelevant. You have been editing reality. Now you shall see a proof corrected." Archie Goodwin, narrator, private investigator, and occasional usher, leaned on the filing cabinet and enjoyed the view. Kramer grunted. "Let's skip the sermon, Wolfe. You said you could tie it all up. I'm listening." Wolfe inclined his head. "Inspector, your patience is a civic virtue. Attend, then." He opened the folder before him, its pages neat as a priest's conscience. First, Julian Merrow, novelist. His book, The Case That Changed His Mind, threatened exposure of Mr. Bond's criminal plagiarism, his theft of manuscripts from unknown authors, later published under prominent names. Merrow intended to reveal this in his final chapter. Bond started to protest. Wolfe's hand rose, a signal that silenced continence. "You killed him, Mr. Bond," Wolfe said calmly, "because exposure meant ruin. You employed the usual literary tools, deceit, substitution, and erasure. You staged an argument between Merrow and Miss Broom, supplied her with a forged confession written on her typewriter, and leaked the document through the press. A clever edit, one that shifted authorship of guilt." Evelyn's lips parted. "That's not true." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "it is precise. You were complicit, Miss Broom, though not murderous. You permitted the forgery because Bond promised you protection and royalties. When you realized Merrow was dead, you panicked and sought to withdraw, hence your recent disappearance from the public eye." Her voice wavered. "He said Merrow was going to destroy him, destroy us both." Vale spoke up, eyes narrow. "You mean destroy our illusion, sweetheart. Bond's been using everyone for ink since the day he bought his first printing press." Wolfe turned his gaze on Vale. "And you, sir, contributed to the fraud willingly. You ghostwrote Merrow's early works and signed silence in exchange for payment." Vale's mouth twisted. "You think I liked it? Merrow was the talent. Bond owned the pipeline. You don't fight a man who prints your paycheck." Kramer's cigar snapped between his fingers. "Wolfe, I need more than ethics. Where's the proof?" Wolfe gestured to me. I handed him a small envelope. Inside was the violet ink fingerprint lifted from Nancy Loring's typewriter ribbon, the one Wolfe had matched to Bond's office fountain pen. "This," Wolfe said, holding it up, "is the indelible signature of guilt. The fingerprint is Mr. Bond's, lifted by Mr. Panzer from Miss Loring's ribbon and matched against the print Saul obtained during a courtesy visit to Bond's office. The ink, Violet Pelican, a custom batch registered to Bond's stationer, leaves no doubt. He used it to sign contracts, correspondence, and, on one disastrous night, the forged confession he dictated to Miss Loring. She died for noticing." Bond's control cracked. "That's absurd. A fingerprint proves nothing. Anyone could have used—" "No one else," Wolfe interrupted, "had that shade of ink, nor the opportunity, nor the arrogance." Kramer took the sheet, examined it, and gave a slow nod. "That'll do." Bond's voice rose. "You're accusing me on pigment and presumption. I'll have your license revoked, Wolfe. Wolfe's smile was small and cold. I have none to revoke, sir. Detection is not a licensed art, though perhaps publishing murder soon will be. Archie couldn't resist. Headline writes itself, Inspector. Kramer's lip twitched. Don't start printing yet, Goodwin. Wolfe continued, ignoring us both. Nancy Loring died because she attempted to warn Miss Broom. Bond arranged the scene, released gas to mimic suicide, and departed by the fire stairs. He relied on panic to supply the rest. Kramer's eyes flicked to Evelyn. You confirm that? Tears glimmered. He told me it was an accident, that she'd been careless with the stove. Phooey, Wolfe said. Gas stoves do not seal windows with tape. Silence. Even Fritz, standing discreetly near the door, seemed carved from stillness. Bond's face had drained of colour. You can't prove it beyond speculation. The chapter you stole means nothing. Nero wrote melodrama. Indeed, Wolfe said softly. But the melodrama was your biography. He picked up the manuscript of chapter 14 and read a single line aloud. If I die, look to the man who edits both manuscripts and men. Wolfe set it down. He named you without naming you. A novelist's tact, but a detective's precision. Kramer rose, slow and heavy. That's enough for me. I'll take him in. Bond tried to recover his polish. You'll regret this. My lawyers will be delighted, Wolfe said. They may finally learn punctuation. Kramer motioned to Vale. You'll come too till we sort your part. Vale shrugged. Fine. At least it'll sell papers. Evelyn turned toward Wolfe, voice breaking. What happens to me? You, madam, will testify, and then perhaps you will write a book, a truthful one, but I advise you not to dedicate it to me. Kramer pocketed the fingerprint envelope, eyeing Wolfe. I'll admit it. You called this one straight. Not bad for a guy who never leaves his chair. Thank you, Inspector, Wolfe said. If I required physical exertion to exercise intellect, civilization would still live in caves. Kramer snorted, halfway to a smile. Yeah, well, save me a beer next time. Fritz stepped forward with timing that would shame a butler school. Inspector, he said. A glass? Kramer hesitated, then took it. What the hell? To the end of the chapter. They drank. Evelyn and Vale were escorted out with Stebbins, who had arrived grim and silent at the door. Bond followed last, deflated but still trying to look like a headline instead of a cautionary tale. When the door closed behind them, the brownstone exhaled. Wolfe set his glass down with a sigh that was almost satisfaction. Mr. Goodwin, our labours are concluded. The residue of deceit has been distilled to a single element, vanity. Yeah, I said, and vanity just got a one-way ticket downtown. He leaned back, fingertips pressed together. The world of publishing, Archie, is proof that words can kill. I grinned. And here I thought only critics did that. He gave me the look that precedes either reprimand or indulgence. Enough. You will compose a memorandum for the record. Be concise. Clarity, after all, is our métier. Sure, I said, heading for the typewriter. But I'm keeping the headline, The Man Who Published Murder. Catchy, don't you think? Phooey. He reached for the bell cord, signalling Fritz for dinner. The sound, soft and deliberate, felt like punctuation, the full stop on a perfect paragraph. As I rolled a fresh sheet into the machine, I thought of Nero, Bond, Evelyn, all those lives edited for profit and power. Wolfe was right. Truth had gone through the press, and the type was set in blood. From the dining room came the clink of plates, the murmur of Fritz's impeccable service, and Wolfe's voice calling, Archie, you will join me. Justice may be served cold, but duck should not. I grinned. Coming, boss. Just finishing the last line. And I typed it, clean and final, the end. If serenity has a sound, it's the clink of Fritz's teapot on Wolfe's mahogany desk. That, and the faint hum of Manhattan trying to pretend it's civilized after midnight. The case was over, officially, beautifully, even legally. Alan Bond was under guard and under glass. Kramer had left with the decency of a man who knows when to stop barking, and for the first time in a week, the brownstone didn't smell like trouble. It smelled like orchids, ink, and tea. I was still getting used to that last one. Wolfe had ordered it instead of beer, which was like Rockefeller ordering tap water. When Fritz appeared with the silver tray, Wolfe actually said, Yes, tea, and the world tilted 3 degrees off axis. Now he sat behind his desk, cup in hand, eyes half-lidded but nowhere near sleep. I took my usual chair, watching the steam curl upward like punctuation in one of his lectures. The bell rang once. I got up automatically, but Fritz was already there. When the door opened, Evelyn Broom stood framed against the hallway light, a slim figure in grey with an expression that didn't know whether to cry or curtsy. "Mr. Wolfe," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you." He inclined his head a quarter inch. "You are welcome, madam. Your ordeal is concluded. Sit." She perched on the edge of the red leather chair, the same spot where Bond had tried to argue himself into immortality. She looked small against all that space and polish. "I still can't believe it," she said, "that it's really over." "Few things end cleanly," Wolfe said, "but the principal actors have exited. That suffices." I poured her tea, feeling like a valet in a fairy tale. She smiled faintly. "You're kinder than you look, Mr. Goodwin." "Don't spread that around," I said. "It'll ruin my reputation." Wolfe's lip twitched, which in our household counts as uproarious laughter. Evelyn sipped, then stared at the cup as if it might explain her life. I was so sure the truth would destroy me, but it's almost a relief. "Truth is rarely fatal," Wolfe said. "Concealment, however, poisons by degrees." She nodded slowly. Julian believed that. He said words could be salvation or sin depending on who held the pen. Wolfe set his cup down with care. He was correct. I confess I have been inattentive to the written word's moral range. Until now I regarded it merely as a nuisance, evidence, documentation, advertisement. But I was wrong. That stopped me mid-breath. Wolfe admitting error was like the Statue of Liberty taking up knitting. He continued, almost to himself, "Words, properly used, can illuminate. They may even, occasionally, redeem." Evelyn looked at him with the kind of gratitude that makes men want to bow. "Then I suppose Julian's work did change something after all." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "It changed minds, which is the rarest form of change." I said, "That's the closest you've come to philosophy since the beer ran out in 42. "Pfui," he muttered, but without heat. She laughed softly, the sound fragile but real. "You're both remarkable. I thought detectives were supposed to be cynical." "We are," I said, "but we have our off days." Fritz reappeared at the doorway, silent as a comma, to collect the tray. Wolfe gave him a nod that would have made a king feel acknowledged. When Fritz vanished, Wolfe turned back to Evelyn. "You will resume your profession?" "I think so," she said. "Writing, yes, but honestly this time. No more ghosts, no more confessions I didn't write." "Good," Wolfe said. "Deception exhausts the soul, and the reader." That earned him another smile, shy but genuine. She rose, smoothing her gloves. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe, and you, Mr. Goodwin, for everything." "Pleasure's mutual," I said. "Try to keep out of print until the dust settles." She laughed again, more freely, and left with Fritz escorting her to the door. When the latch clicked shut, Wolfe let out a sigh that was half exhalation, half punctuation mark. "A singular woman," he said. "Meaning she'll never call again," I said. "Meaning," Wolfe replied, "that she has achieved candour. Few do." I leaned back, crossing my legs. "So, boss, shall we toast to literature or to survival?" He gave me a sidelong glance. "Neither. To education." He reached for the dictation pad. That was my cue. I slid behind the typewriter and waited for the music to start. "Proceed," he said. "Ready?" "Report. Subject, the case that changed his mind." He paused. "Summary, a demonstration in moral inversion. The written word, long my adversary, revealed itself as instrument of truth." I hesitated. "That's new territory for you." "Silence," he said, but there was no edge to it. "Continue. In the matter of Nero, Bond, and Broom, guilt has been duly assigned. Innocence, however, is an unstable condition. It must be renewed daily." "Lovely," I said. "You're getting poetic." He ignored me. Addendum. This office recognizes that logic alone cannot resolve the subtleties of conscience. Occasionally, rarely, sentiment serves. I typed, grinning. "You want me to file that under miracles or metaphysics?" "File it," he said. Under education. I hit the period key like it owed me money. You mean the case changed your mind? He looked at me, the faintest ghost of a smile haunting his mouth. Briefly, Mr. Goodwin. Briefly. The clock on the desk ticked in the quiet that followed. Outside, Manhattan went about its business, the presses thundering, the headlines churning, the city rewriting its own confessions by the minute. Somewhere out there another story was being born, another lie rehearsed. But for once, in this room, the words were true. I rolled the finished page from the typewriter and blew on it, though it didn't need drying. All done, I said. And since you're out of beer, shall I pour more tea? His snort was eloquent. Do not tempt fate, Archie. My tolerance for reform is finite. Good, I said. I was starting to worry you'd go soft. He leaned back, eyes half closed again, but I caught the flicker at the corner of his mouth, a smile almost. Go to bed, he murmured. We have earned the night. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the glow from the orchids filtering through the open door of the plant rooms. Their scent drifted into the office, calm and clean, a far cry from the ink and blood that had filled the week. At the threshold I looked back once. Wolfe sat motionless in the dim light, a mountain at rest, the tea untouched beside him. He reached for a single page, the report, and read it once, lips moving slightly. Then, with the same care he gave to rare books and rare truths, he placed it in the drawer marked closed. Outside, the city hummed. I stepped into the night, collar up, hat down, air sharp with the promise of fresh crimes and tomorrow's deadlines. Somewhere, a linotype clattered. Somewhere else, Kramer was probably growling at a reporter. I smiled. Wolfe might have changed his mind, but the world hadn't. That's what keeps the rent paid. And if he ever does decide to write a book about all this, I'm buying the film rights first. By 8 o'clock, the brownstone had slipped back into its native rhythm, the quiet, dignified heartbeat of a house that had outlived more crimes than some precincts. From upstairs came the faint whisper of orchids exhaling perfume through humid air. From the kitchen, Fritz's restrained symphony of clinks and sizzling promise. After a week of police warrants, murder manuscripts, and confessions written in violet ink, I'll admit the place smelled better. Wolfe sat at his desk as if nothing extraordinary had happened, except that the Times lay unopened beside him. That alone was a symptom of inner upheaval. Normally he skimmed headlines before orchids. Now he stared at a single page from his report, as though truth might bloom if he watched long enough. I said, if you're planning to frame that statement, make sure it's spelled right. Kramer's going to quote you out of context anyway. He grunted. The inspector's literacy is not my concern. My phrasing will survive him. That's confidence, I said, or hubris with punctuation. He didn't rise to it. That too was new. At 7:58 sharp, Fritz appeared in the doorway, impeccable as ever. Dinner at 8, sir. Duck à l'orange. Acceptable, Wolfe said. Fritz gave me the faintest smile, the secret joy of a man whose kitchen was finally free of homicide detectives, and withdrew. The sound of plates and polite clatter drifted down the hall, a domestic lullaby that meant civilization had returned. The doorbell rang just as the clock struck. I looked up. That's either Kramer or a bill collector, both dangerous after dark. Attend to it, Wolfe murmured. I did, and sure enough, there stood Inspector Kramer, hat in hand, cigar unlit for once. He looked almost apologetic, which made me wonder if he'd come to confess. Evening, Goodwin, he said. Your boss in? For my sins, yes. You bringing trouble or closure? Neither. He reached into his coat and produced a slim velvet case. Evidence property number 721B, officially released. I ushered him in. Wolfe looked up, eyebrows arching at the sight of the case. Kramer set it on the desk and flipped it open. Inside lay the gold fountain pen, the one he'd taken as evidence from the scene. Figured you'd want to pass it along to Miss Broom, he said. It gleamed under the lamplight, innocent as sin before discovery. Your handwriting tool, Wolfe, Kramer said. Figured you'd want it back. Wolfe eyed it, nostrils flaring slightly. A curious gesture. You rarely return weapons. Don't flatter yourself, Kramer said. I just don't like keeping trophies I didn't earn. Wolfe inclined his massive head. Commendable scruple. Don't make me regret it, Kramer said, but there was no bite in it. Good work, Wolfe. Don't let it go to your head. It's already occupied, Wolfe replied. Kramer's snort was half laugh, half smoke. Yeah, figured. He turned toward the door, then paused. You know, sometimes I think you actually like solving these things. Like? Wolfe said. No, I endure them. Same thing, Kramer muttered, and left. When the door shut, Wolfe stared at the pen for a long moment, then picked it up and turned it between his fingers. A fine instrument, he said. Gold, balanced, resilient, misused by a fool, yet not at fault itself. I leaned on the desk. That sounded almost forgiving. It was descriptive, he said. Sure, I said. And the Grand Canyon's a ditch. He sighed, deep, resigned, and faintly amused. Archie, spare me your analogies. This case, unpleasant as it was, contained instruction. Meaning? He gestured toward the orchid rooms. Even the most delicate organism requires adjustment to flourish. I too, perhaps. I blinked. Did I just hear you say you learned something? You did, he said. Do not gloat. I grinned. I'll restrain myself. Barely. Fritz returned then, announcing, dinner is served. Wolfe rose, which meant the conversation was adjourned by executive order. We moved to the dining room, where candles glowed soft against crystal, and the duck was arranged like edible sculpture. Fritz poured the beer, pale, frosted perfection, and withdrew. For a few blessed minutes, there was only the ritual of food, the steady clink of silver, the faint sigh that meant approval, the kind of silence that passes for music in that house. Finally, Wolfe said, You have observed, Mr. Goodwin, that words can deceive. I find now that they can also heal. I swallowed my beer. That's practically sentimental. You planning to start a self-help column? Phooey, he said, but it lacked venom. I simply acknowledge reality. Miss Broom's confession, her true one, restored equilibrium. The act of writing itself absolved her. And you, I said, have been hanging around with too many authors. He gave me a look, then set down his fork. You, Archie, would do well to record this case with restraint. It is not entertainment. Everything's entertainment if you write it right, I said. That's what keeps the public paying your bills. Your bills, he corrected. I shrugged. Details. He took another measured bite. Still, the experience was instructive. I misjudged the written word. It can illuminate as well as deceive. I raised my glass. To illumination, then. He clinked it lightly, a gesture so rare it belonged in the Smithsonian. After dinner, we moved back to the office. The city outside hummed its endless refrain of horns and humanity, the steady pulse that said life refused to care about solved murders. Wolfe settled into his chair with the evening paper and finally opened it. I rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter and began the final memo, closing statements, fee notation, and a small note at the bottom. Case filed under education. He glanced up. You enjoy irony too much. Just keeping the prose lively, I said. At 9:30 sharp, Fritz entered again bearing coffee. He poured, bowed, and departed. Wolfe lifted his cup, inhaled, and said quietly, Archie, have you noticed the room feels cleaner? You mean no suspects, no police, no lying witnesses? Precisely. The air is breathable again. That or Fritz upgraded the polish. He almost smiled. Do not trivialize it. Order has returned. That, Mr. Goodwin, is the essence of civilization. I thought dinner was, I said. Dinner sustains it. Order defines it. We lapsed into companionable quiet. I watched him reading, the gold pen now resting neatly beside the blotter, a relic redeemed. The lamplight softened the edges of his face, making him look less like a fortress and more like a man who'd briefly lowered the drawbridge. Finally, he spoke without looking up. Archie. Yeah? Remind me tomorrow to send Theodore a note of appreciation. The orchids survived neglect admirably. Will do, I said. They're tougher than they look. As are you, he said. That one landed quietly, like a compliment sneaking in after curfew. Thanks, I said. I think. He folded the newspaper. You will see that Mr. Cohen receives the sanitized version of our report. Omit my reflections. They are private. Sure, I said. Wouldn't want the Gazette quoting you on redemption. It'd ruin your street cred. He reached for the bell cord but hesitated, letting it fall back gently. You persist in mockery because sincerity embarrasses you. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just like seeing you human once in a while. Pfui, he said again, but softly. The clock struck 10. Somewhere above, the orchids whispered in their hothouse, fed by lights and patience. Outside, a siren wailed briefly, then faded into the night traffic. I typed the final line of the report, dated it, and slid it into the cabinet. Another case closed. Another page turned. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed now, hands resting like punctuation marks on his stomach. Goodwin, he said. You may retire. Gladly, I said. But for the record, you're getting philosophical again. Dangerous habit. I shall survive it, he murmured. I turned off the desk lamp, leaving only the soft gold glow from the corridor. At the doorway I looked back. Wolfe sat unmoving, a mountain at rest, the gold pen glinting faintly beside the empty cup. Outside, Manhattan's presses thundered, rewriting the world in black ink and fresh lies. But in that office, truth had been edited, proofed and filed. Clean copy at last. I slipped on my coat, flipped off the final switch and thought, maybe he really had changed. Not much, just enough. In our business, minds don't change easy. But if you can make Nero Wolfe think twice, maybe there's hope for the rest of us.